The meeting is now streaming live on Facebook on the Young Communist League of South Africa Ufasimba Facebook page. This is a public interaction. It is hosted by the Young Communist League. The presenter is SACP General Secretary, Comrade Blade Nzimande. He will be reflecting on the outcomes of the SACP Central Committee meeting. Under the theme, we can't go back to the crisis before the coronavirus. What we need is a developmental path. It is a new economy that serves the needs of all the people. The Young Communist League used a key word from the 1848 manifesto by Marx and Engels, saying what is needed is a revolutionary reconstitution of our society at large. I will now welcome Andile Mosha, YCL Deputy National Secretary, to introduce SACP General Secretary, who will now take over after the introduction.
Thanks very much, Comrade Alex, and good morning, comrades. Sometimes it becomes not an easy task to welcome a comrade that is well known, not through other things, but issues that are preoccupying or are at the doorstep of the entire workers and the poor. Without doing any preamble, because today we are hosting Monday. He is our professor today. He's going to give us, lead us in this discussion. We are welcoming you, Comrade GS, in the hope that next year you are going to migrate to a professorship, because it's now, we can't wait. With those words, let's welcome our GS. You are all welcome, comrades. We highly appreciate for you being here in these platforms of YCL. Thanks.
Thank you, GS. The platform is yours.
Thanks very much, Comrade Andil. That's a very revolutionary introduction. It's brief and straight to the point. Be careful what you wish for, actually, because I am wishing that I become a professor soon to start working towards my retirement, you know. Not that professors are all retired, but it would be nice to retire as a professor in the SACP. No, thank you very much, comrades. Let me just make sure that I time myself, because I don't want to be speaking forever. Let me greet all the comrades, Comrade Alex, Comrade Dinigo, and all the other comrades who are here. I also heard Duma is here. Kubula. It's a fellow Maritzburg boy, by the way. And all the others who actually have joined this. I'm really very pleased and honored that I've been invited, essentially to talk to the statement of the Central Committee. The Central Committee that we held on Friday, the 29th of May, which was our first Central Committee, which was virtual. And was also the first Central Committee of the year, because we had to postpone our first Central Committee, which in fact was to take place just as we were was supposed to take place just after the announcement that we were going to go to the lockdown in late March. So, as Comrade Alex has indicated, really the theme of our statement if one can give one, is based on the fact that, or it says, we cannot go back to the crisis before the crisis. That is the challenge of the moment. Maybe if I can start, at the Central Committee, we were fortunate that we had a presentation from Comrade Uzweli Mkhize in his capacity as Minister of Health, just to give us a detailed account of what the health department is doing, and government, of course, on COVID-19. Although I will come back to that matter when we talk about it just now. And indeed, the Central Committee did commend Comrade Mkhize for the wonderful work that the department was doing. There was also a dedicated input on the economy that was done by Comrade Rob Davis, which I hope at some stage also, that I was saying to Alex, at some stage, I think that paper, because it's the party's position on the economic recovery post-COVID-19, I wish also we could give it some time as a lecture or a webinar for discussion by comrades. I must also just, by the way, qualify right from the word go that a lot of what is contained in the Central Committee statement is about the economy. But I must just say, I'm not an economist. I'm only a communist. You remember how Che Guevara was appointed as the first minister of economic development in Cuba. Some comrades may remember this, is that after the victory of the Cuban Revolution on the 1st of January, 1959, these were youngsters, by the way, these revolutionaries. They were all in their, well, mostly the core leadership was in their late 20s. Fidel Castro pulled them all together and say, now we've taken over the country, who is going to be minister where? And then Comrade Fidel said, well, let me start with what may become our most important portfolio. Who is an economist amongst us here? So Che Guevara quickly raised his hand, and said, I am. Then Fidel said, yes, you're going to be Minister for Economic Development in our new revolutionary government. But then Che protested and said, but what do I know about the economy, Fidel said, but I just asked who is an economist. You raised your hand, said, no, I thought you were asking who is a communist, amongst us here. That's why I was raising my hand. So I want to clarify that right from the word go. Obviously, the first issue that we discussed extensively after I had given the political report at the Central Committee was COVID-19. Maybe I better just mention this thing up front, although it is mentioned later in the statement, that it's very important for us as the party that at all times we are able to characterize the moment that we are faced with and its challenges. It's the moment, and of course, within the context of the period we are in, or the conjuncture, which is the word that we normally use, so that is able to guide us on what is to be done at all times. That is why when we came out of our 14th Congress, we came up with this sort of watchwords, if you like, or what should guide us as the Communist Party in the period we were in then, which is still relevant in whatever period we are in, that we must actually be guided by three things. Firstly, it's the necessity for strategic consistency, that in whatever we do, we don't lose sight of our strategic goals and our strategic objectives. But the second thing also that we must always do is analytical awareness. As communists, we must always be analyzing the period that we are faced with, not just for the purposes of analysis, but for the purposes then of coming up with what is to be done, So we said the second thing we must always do is analytical awareness, or have analytical awareness. And the third thing we must always do is tactical flexibility, because different situations may require that we adapt our tactics, but without losing our strategic objectives. You can only do that if you are able to analyze. So that is why it is important that we characterize this moment we are in now. And we have said that in this moment we are faced with what we would call triple immediate challenges. Now, we are emphasizing immediate also because we want to distinguish this from what we normally refer to as our triple challenges, because the triple challenges we normally talk about are actually, to characterize them correctly, are the triple structural challenges, which is poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So those are triple structural challenges that we face, but the immediate triple challenges that we face are the following. First is COVID-19, primarily as a health crisis, and I will come back to say why I say primarily, because it's not exclusively a health crisis, but it's primarily COVID-19. The second challenge is how to deal with the deepening economic crisis that we are facing, which doesn't start now with COVID, but also the third triple challenges is what we call the multiple crises of social reproduction. By social reproduction, as the party, we refer to simply the struggle of people, our households, our families, to make ends meet, to sustain themselves. Now, the three triple challenges are deeply interlinked: COVID-19, deepening economic crisis, and the multiple crises of social reproduction. The three things are very, very interlinked. That's what characterizes the period that we are in. That is why then we say, as a point of departure in our statement on the fundamental right to life and responses to COVID-19. I don't know, Alex, whether you were going to be putting this, the paragraphs as I go through them of the statement or not. But we say the COVID-19 pandemic was neither unpredictable nor unpredicted. It may sound like a very bold statement. Yes, we are making it boldly because we are saying it was neither unpredictable nor unpredicted. And the statement goes on to explain, to say that for some years now, the scientific community has been warning about the probability of serious pandemic outbreaks for which we have no inbuilt immunity. The current pandemic has been preceded by other deadly pandemics, many of them known as zoonotic diseases. They are called zoonotic because a lot of these pandemics are diseases transmitted from animals to humans. For instance, in government, if I can just make a quick example, at the moment we are talking about, I'll come back also to that matter, about the necessity to have multiple disciplines of science to tackle the pandemic, which must also include, by the way, animal sciences, because increasingly our pandemics derive from diseases that are transmitted from animals to humans. And these outbreaks are directly linked to a number of things. A natural world environment that is increasingly off balance, as it were, as a result of accelerated monopoly capitalist-driven destruction of the environment, which includes deforestation, land grabs by capital. In Brazil, you see now the right-wing Bolsonaro is doing a land grab of parts of the Amazon. The loss of biodiversity, Biodiversity, by the way, is very important because biodiversity simply refers to the fact that there is variety of life that is found on Earth, which mostly is necessary, mostly, like plants, animals, fungi, microorganisms, human beings. And biodiversity is important to maintain because the interaction between these different life systems on Earth are necessary, and they normally reinforce each other to make the world a livable place. But capitalist greed is destroying biodiversity. By the way, South Africa, for those who do not know, I hope out of this lecture we can generate some new environmentalists. South Africa is the 5th most biodiverse country in the world. We have got very rich biodiversity as a country, which we must protect. Also, the destruction, this capitalist destruction, is also characterized by mass-scale factory farming, including wide use of antibiotics on livestock, producing new drug-resistant superbugs. Now, the destruction of many integrated local production networks and their substitution with what are referred to as global value chains have added further vectors along which epidemic outbreaks can quickly move globally. In fact, predictions are that we are likely to be heading for more pandemics on Earth as we move forward, which is a big challenge. All of this, of course, we are facing even greater and looming threat of what we call ecocidal. That term is taken from suicidal, but here is ecocidal because we are destroying our environment and our ecosystem. And we all say this is rooted in the unsustainable capitalist system, which is premised on profit accumulation. This, by the way, can be regarded as constituting what should, for us, be what we refer to as the political economy of COVID-19. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, just to explain that further, has also dramatically exposed many of the underlying social and economic fault lines in capitalist society, our statement says, which is class, gendered, racial, and other inequalities. Now, this is very important because as one comrade once said, who is an academic and a sociologist, said, it would be a mistake to look at COVID-19 as a disease that gets transmitted through our arteries and veins of the human body. Yes, it gets transmitted that way, but it also gets transmitted through the arteries and veins of class, gender, and racial inequalities in society, or class, race, gender realities. That is why it's often the poor who are most susceptible to such diseases because of these inequalities that we are talking about. The working class and the poor living in overcrowded informal settlements, forced to travel in packed taxis or trains to work. And even now with this COVID-19, they are more than vulnerable. What COVID-19 has also, according to the Central Committee statement arising out of our discussion, has also illustrated quite dramatically is the importance of what we regard as essential work. In fact, the former leader of the Labour Party in Britain, we call him there JC, that's Jeremy Corbyn, put it nicely in one of his last speeches in Parliament, that we must thank COVID for having reminded us who are the most important workers. It's the health workers, it's the sanitation workers, it's the care workers, it's your cleaning workers, it's your factory workers who produce the ventilators. and reminds us what is not essential when we are faced with a pandemic, that advertising managers may not be that essential, or stock exchange brokers, or weapons peddlers or brokers. Never has the work of the cleaner been underlined as being so important with COVID-19. So it helps us to take us back to the basics about who we are as humanity. Now, social production, of course, for us as the party, must therefore be transformed structurally and systematically redirected towards meeting the collective needs of society, as opposed to profit maximization for the benefit of a tiny minority. The Central Committee further underlines the importance of measures that have been adopted by governments to contain COVID-19. And I think in that paragraph, what is important can be put differently is that government has emphasized the necessity to save lives. Of course, whilst at the same time saving sustainable livelihoods. Now, the two things, through work, by the way, amongst other things, the two things are not a dichotomy, as Donald Trump and the DA, they say, as if we have to choose. If we were to choose, we choose life. But the two things are deeply interlinked, even right from Marx's work. We cannot have life without production, and we cannot have production without life. Human beings who do production. So for us, we should be looking at life and the economy, for instance, in a dialectical fashion. But it can't be that we can do like Trump and like the DA. Let's allow people to go back to work. Anyway, we are still heading for the rise in the curve of infections. Let's rather face it once and for all so that we are over it, almost irrespective of the consequences of what this will do. Government, the Central Committee, was very impressed that at least government has been trying to save lives in the first instance, even in the wake of pressures to actually just open up the economy willy-nilly. Of course, for capitalists, the main reason is that their reason for existence is primarily for profit and private capital accumulation, and not about human needs, even not about human life, by the way. Capitalists care about human life insofar as those human beings are factors of production. Now, stringent measures, the Central Committee said, are important, therefore, and should take precedent in protecting public life, public health, and also enforce standards of safety. Now, the one other thing we've said as the SACP is that in pursuing what we are facing now, we are, as we have said now and again, as Marxist-Leninists, we are constrained by the very same contradictions we seek to resolve. In fact, the one area where this is expressing itself at its sharpest, which is in that second paragraph under our risk adjustment strategy, is the education system. The education system is one of the areas which sharply expresses this reality. For instance, the Central Committee warns, rightly so, that we must not rush ahead in opening schools that have resources and leaving behind the majority of rural and township schools. In my deployment, I've been faced with the same things with universities. What do I do? Wits University, UCT, Stellenbosch, and other historically advantaged institutions, they say, we are going to start with online learning now that students are at home. And we are going to buy laptops for the poor students in our universities. Of course, you would know, comrades, that perhaps it may be slightly far less challenging for some of our historically advantaged universities to do so. Also because they've got very few poor students. For instance, if you compare University of Zululand or University of Limpopo for that matter with UCT, and you go and count the percentage of NSFAS students in those institutions, University of Zululand and Limpopo, they are just about 85%, 90% NSFAS students who come from poor background. You may find at WITS it's 10% or 15% or 20%. But practically though, I want to say this because it's one of the things we must debate. It does pose this reality of inequalities, very difficult situation when we've got to implement. For instance, as a Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, what do you do when WITS says we are starting with online learning when you know Zululand can't? Do you say to University of Zululand, no, to WITS, no, don't start with online learning before Zululand is able to, even if it takes Zululand 2 months or 3 months? Or do you say, yes, I won't stop them, but let me rather focus my resources to say, how do I bring up University of Zululand, even if it's a month later, for as long as at the end of the day, not a single student is left behind? Those are issues of, well, a tactical question actually, and which best illustrates this problem. You can give all the students laptops, but those who come from poor backgrounds don't have connectivity at all. So we are constrained by the very same contradictions of inequality that we want to overcome. Central Committee also spoke, I'll just talk briefly about this, about the situation in the Western Cape. Situation in the Western Cape is very bad. In fact, I think in terms of the latest figures, if I'm not mistaken, that I saw this morning, the deaths now, or the infections in the Western Cape are just over 60% of the total infections in the country. Now, we must focus on the Western Cape. That's what the Central Committee said. Not only the Western Cape, but we must give it particular focus because any part of the country that's showing the worst epidemiology of the disease can affect the rest of the country. Of course, the Central Committee also noted, can you imagine if if the Western Cape was doing better than the rest of the province, how the DA would have opportunistically exploited that to say, this illustrates that the DA is a much more efficient government than the 8 provinces that are controlled by the ANC. We said as the Central Committee, we don't want to be tempted to go that route because we must grow up and be more mature and say the problem facing the people in the Western Cape, we can't just opportunistically use it to attack the DA. Rather, let's focus on how we rescue the situation there. It's the working class in any case. It's the colored and the African working class in the Western Cape, which is bearing the brunt of this situation. And immediately, of course, the situation in the Western Cape is affecting the Eastern Cape because of the historic linkages, colonial migrant situation between Eastern Cape and Western Cape. Now, the SACP, as I have said, the Central Committee also endorsed this strategic perspective, which we have raised as our theme, that we cannot go back to the crisis before the crisis. What we are struggling for now in dealing with the immediate triple challenges is not aimed at just returning to what the situation was pre-COVID-19 and pre-lockdown. This means that a mere recovery to where we were is both impossible and inadequate, and it's also undesirable. as we were already in a very deep crisis prior to the eruption of COVID-19. We do outline those things there in the Central Committee statement, that labor brokering, casualization, and other strategies of the neoliberal restructuring of the workplace has led to job losses and has led to the casualization and has actually led to, amongst other things, the fragmentation and the weakening of the trade union movement. And COVID-19 and the lockdown is worsening the situation. In fact, as things stand now, we are not yet as certain of the extent to which we are having unemployment in the country. As I will show, by the way, the input by Uduma Kubul, which we will be quoting but acknowledging later, shows that we may actually be facing between 16 and 17% contraction in our gross domestic product. Now, if you compare this to 1931, which was the Great Depression, the contraction of the GDP was only 10.6%. In fact, in South Africa, we might want to even face the reality that actually post-lockdown, not even just that by the time we reach level 1, we might find that unemployment may have doubled from 10 million to 20 million. That's a reality that we have to face and deal with. And the impact this might be having on, for instance, the strength of the trade union movement. Because, for instance, a COSATU pre-COVID-19 and a COSATU post-lockdown may be two very different things. And that poses huge challenges for us as the Communist Party, because with a fragmented and weakened working class, our struggle is severely weakened, comrades. Now, what also COVID-19 has exposed is that capitalism is incapable of even addressing the most basic needs of humanity. Which means, therefore, what the Central Committee was saying, we must exploit this opportunity to intensify the ideological critique of capitalism as a system. Now we are even in a much better situation that we can now even start an SACP virtual political school. Something that before we thought it was costing us a lot of money to bring just 100 cadres from our 9 districts across the country. Cost us a fortune. But today we can be able to bring those 100 cadres virtually and be able to have webinars, political schools, debates, and all that. And we must exploit this opportunity. We must not lose this crisis of capitalism. Today, you hardly ever hear someone saying the stock exchange is going to be the solution. The market is going to be the solution. Even in the advanced capitalist countries, everybody is crying for the state to do something about health, to do something about unemployment insurance. Even in the United States, it's more than 40 million people who have now registered for some kind of unemployment insurance assistance in those places. Everyone is talking about solidarity. Now, that in itself shows that when chips are down, when things are difficult, when humanity's life is at stake, capitalism is no solution. Instead, it's socialist type measures that are called for, like social solidarity and the increasing role of the state. Even capitalists now, some of them are saying to us as government, why don't you help us buy some of our companies? Of course, others, they want us to buy their debt. But now all of a sudden, but it's always the case with capitalism. When it is in crisis, it calls upon the state to bail it out. But when capitalism is doing well, it is the capitalists who are benefiting. So this is a huge opportunity for an ideological critique on capitalism. Now, the Central Committee then was also saying in this statement that our response must be also, apart from the ideological one, that to concretely seek to drive revolutionary structural transformation of our economy, and also in order to address the multiple crises of social reproduction. And the central, they are listed some of those in our statement, like access to quality health care for all. It's very interesting just on this, that if you look globally today, those countries that have had very weak public health system are suffering more than the countries that have had a strong public health system. The strange situation is the UK, but it can also be explained. The UK has a national health system, but large parts of its own care system has been privatized. Like the destruction is happening in old age homes because those have long been privatized. This underlines the importance of access to quality health care for all. We also need to reduce the inequalities, unemployment, inequality, and poverty. We must fight the uneven colonial underdevelopment and different levels of development that we have. We must invest in infrastructure. I'll come back to that. These are the structural changes that we must make. By the way, we must at all times, these things we are calling for here as what we can call revolutionary structural changes. We must distinguish this, by the way, from this call by neoliberals, even in our own country. Every day we are told about the necessity for structural reforms. Some of them are even saying, let's not forget about even the structural reforms that we had committed to do even prior to COVID. Why? Because structural reform means neoliberal restructuring in the economy. For us, we need revolutionary structural transformation of the economy and society. These are also outlined in our statement. It includes the following, comrades. And this is not just a shopping list. These are things that we have seriously looked into. This is an opportunity to decisively advance towards a national health insurance. As we deal with the casualties and those infected by the coronavirus, and what we are doing to deal with that in terms of provision of hospital beds and so on, we should also at the same time be giving an account on what progress are we making towards realizing the national health insurance, or how we use the fight against COVID-19 to advance national health insurance. We also will need, in fact, the president is very interesting. And the Central Committee did reflect on this to say, let's grab this. The president is talking very strongly about the fact that we need a new economy post-COVID, and we must start fighting for it now. We must support that idea of a new economy. But of course, it's going to be contested because the state capture networks want to use this to shape the economy, including populists like Julius Malema, who says, let this economy collapse. Like those who are saying, let the RAND collapse, we'll pick it up with so-called radical economic transformation. Let this economy collapse so that we're going to rebuild it anew. That's a very populist and dangerous stance. We need to transform this economy. To transform this economy. And amongst the things we must do is investment into infrastructure. I'm going to come back when I actually touch on Comrade Duma Qubule's inputs, by the way, which I'm just going to, towards the end, talk about it very briefly, because there are some very interesting things there. He's there joining us. I hope you won't mind that we are actually referring to some of the we'll be referring to some of the very important points. We need massive infrastructure, and unapologetically, the priority for infrastructure now, the struggle we must wait, must be an infrastructure program targeted at underdeveloped areas in our country. To build roads, adequate sanitation and water infrastructure, rail infrastructure, energy security infrastructure. That's very important. In addition, as a key structural measure that we need, a revolutionary one, we need a high impact employment creation policy. We also need transformation of the agricultural sector and the mining sector, with a particular emphasis on beneficiation. But much more importantly, comrades, we must turn around our state-owned enterprises. I know, and it's healthy that there is a debate. COSATU, for instance, is saying, let's take money from the PIC to bail out ESCOM. We are meeting with COSATU tomorrow as the SACP. We will debate that and engage around that issue. But the key thing that the Communist Party, the Central Committee, was calling for on state-owned entities is that we need a financing model that is progressive so that these state-owned enterprises are able to play their role. When we are faced with a reality, as Marx would say, as human beings, we make history under circumstances not of our own choosing. The state capture networks looted our state-owned enterprises, but it's no use to cry. Those who looted must be called to account, definitely. Some of them, or those who must go to jail. But it's of no use to lament. Let's then say, given this reality we are inheriting, how do we develop a financing model so that our state-owned enterprises are able to play the role that they are supposed to play? Now, COVID has brought the issue of a basic income grant back. We've said that as the SACP, we do need to give serious consideration to what we call a minimum income support grant and the adoption of developmental poverty eradication strategies. By the way, our structures, YCL, need to be looking into this thing of how food parcels have now become a new means of manipulating our people. It's a shameful thing, by the way, this thing of food parcels. It's not a nice thing that our people are queuing for food parcels. Worse than when food parcels are distributed along factionalist lines. We need to be looking at alternative means, even vouchers for that matter, rather than, and also, for instance, you can't be going into deep slaughter and distributing food parcels and be discriminating against foreign nationals, for instance. That's totally un-African, by the way, amongst other things. Also, what you need as part of structural transformation, what the Central Committee said, we need to mobilize domestic resources. Even before we go to the IMF and the World Bank, we must say, what domestic resources do we have? Duma Qubule's input that I'm going to talk to now, towards the end, addresses this issue. So let me not spend too much time here. But what is necessary? Now, Comrade Alex, we've been debating this, and I've been saying, we are committed on government side, for instance, just to talk about my deployment, to make research funds available on building this new economy that the president is talking about. Because the president is talking about that, money must flow then to begin to say, we also need research into this new economy. And as the Communist Party, we must also be in the forefront. Amongst other things we must calculate the total asset value of retirement and pension funds in our country. One estimate at the moment is that it's 12 trillion rands. And we need to be asking the question, which we started asking 20 years ago when the SACP launched its financial sector transformation campaign. How are these resources being used? But I'll come back to those when I talk about what is normally referred to as prescribed assets. We do need, of course, to transform the financial sector and diversify it. We cannot go back to a pre-COVID-19 financial sector dominated by 4 big banks that just do not understand what it means to fund small, medium enterprises and cooperatives. And its priorities also have been somewhere else, not in supporting investment into the productive economy. Central Committee also talks about the necessity for being part of the global Green Deal, environmental sustainable economic development. Now, I'm going to come back onto these other issues around fiscal and monetary policy, which I will talk about briefly towards the end. The SACP Central Committee was also saying in this statement, arising out of our discussions, never have we seen government operating in such an improved, coordinated fashion as like this National Coronavirus Command Council. I can be witness to this, being a member of it. We've never worked in such a coordinated fashion as government. What lessons can we learn out of this? That even beyond the coronavirus, we continue to work, government continues to work in an integrated manner as part of strengthening a developmental state. Now, Central Committee also called to say, yes, tomorrow when we are post-COVID, we may not having the National Coronavirus Command Council, but maybe we need another command council, a presidentially led sustainable recovery and development council that should coordinate almost in the same way as we have been coordinating dealing with coronavirus. By the way, when I'm using my finger, comrades, I'm not threatening. That's just my mannerisms. I apologize for that if it offends some other comrades. It's a way of making an emphasis. Now, the Central Committee did discuss what then is the role of the SACP and the working class in dealing with these immediate triple challenges, COVID-19, deepening economic crisis, and the multiple crises of social reproduction. We underlined the things that we have said before, but the most important issue is building strong organization at district level. Going forward now, dealing with COVID-19, there's going to be focus at district level because the districts are not the same. Some are in a very serious situation, like your metros. Others are not very bad. Some yet are in somewhere in the middle. District level organization is going to be absolutely important. So is international solidarity as well. Communist Party Central Committee, for instance, called for an end to sanctions in the world against Cuba, against Venezuela, against Syria by the United States in some instances, and everywhere, because these sanctions continue to contribute towards the increase in the infections in COVID-19. President Trump, unfortunately, is so short-sighted, doesn't understand that allowing coronavirus to spread in Venezuela is a direct threat to the United States because the world has become one global center. And we're also calling for scrapping of debt for poor countries so that they are able to deal with this. Now, let me just then, comrades, in moving towards the end, talk about this issue of prescribed assets. What are prescribed assets? The YCL at some stage had asked me to come and deal with this matter in a webinar or a lecture. Let me just say this very quickly. The idea of prescribed assets, by the way, is not even a new idea of the democratic government. Before 1994, in our own country, pension funds, life assurance companies, and the Public Investment Corporation, which manages the government employees' pension fund, they were all required to invest a part of their funds in particular projects. That's why it's called prescribed assets, in particular assets. This actually was the situation right from the time when the National Party took over, just after 1948 into the 1980s. For instance, that's how the apartheid government managed to build things like, though ESCOM came before that, but to reinvest back into ESCOM, to build your East Coast, to build some of the major state-owned enterprises, Sasol and so on. It was because certain monies was being directed. But closer to democracy, F.W. de Klerk made sure that he does away with this thing in order to deprive the democratic government from accessing these resources to drive an agenda beneficial to the majority of our people. As a result, of course, under apartheid, infrastructure development was designed not for the interests of all the people, but for a minority. Our areas, for the majority, were underdeveloped, and they were worse off under apartheid. Now, through the significant contribution, as we say in this document, slightly on the side, public investment in infrastructure increased as a percentage of gross domestic product and peaked in 1979 at almost 30%. This covered roads, rails, ports, housing, water, and energy. In other words, by law, prescribed assets by law, you say, of this amount of money being held as liquidity by the banks, by the insurance companies, by the pension funds, this percentage must go, for example, in this instance, that's what we must be saying, to building rail infrastructure for safe travel by the working class, to build housing, to invest in housing, to invest in the ports for purposes of our economy, to invest in building roads in poor communities. And that is possible to be done because we are sitting with an investment strike in South Africa. Lots of monies in the financial sector are not invested. Even those that are being invested problematically. Just take the PIC, for instance. Just go and read the Mpati report of that commission by the president and see where the PIC money is being spent. Some of our comrades are saying, when the Communist Party says, take some of this pension money and invest it into the productive economy and into infrastructure, the Communist Party wants our monies to be used recklessly. It's not true. The monies are being used right now recklessly. And your middlemen, and it's often men who actually invest this money, they are creaming off. So it's not that monies of the workers are sitting idle. So the Communist Party is saying, let's use them. They are being used right now. They are building these huge malls. By the way, with online shopping, these malls are likely to be a thing of the past, not so long from now. I hope I'm wrong. Now, following the period of the 1980s, there was indeed a decline in infrastructure investment in our country. As a result, the economic and social infrastructure inherited by the democratic government in 1994 was aging, poorly located as a result of unequal development and not properly maintained. In effect, Our government in 1994 was given an unfunded mandate because the resources that were used by the apartheid regime were taken away, did away with prescribed assets, and we had a beautiful constitution, but that we just could not fund. And that's part of the reality we are dealing with now. That's part of the crisis that this has generated, which we are saying we must not go back to. We need a wide-ranging mobilization of domestic resources to fund economic turnaround and sustainable recovery, reconstruction, and development. Now, that's where then, towards the end, Comrade Duma Kubule's slides become very important, Duma. I want to just highlight a few very quickly. Alex, I don't know whether you have this. There is one slide I have already spoken to from Comrade Duma Kubule's presentation, which shows that the one I spoke about on that we are likely to have 16 to 17% GDP contraction. Also cites the report by the Human Sciences Research Council that 55% of people in informal settlements had no money to buy food, and 66% in townships. But what I really like, and the Communist Party also has been arguing along similar lines, is slide 3, the next slide, Alex. I really like Duma Kubule's notion of monetary sovereignty. You know, we always, as the party, talking about the necessity to defend our sovereignty. By the way, defending our national sovereignty is not in contradiction with international solidarity. It's only sovereign nations, by the way, it's only truly sovereign nations that are able to enter into progressive internationalist solidarity. But it's important that we defend this. What is monetary sovereignty? Comrade Duma defines it as a country that is able to issue its own currency. A country that taxes and imposes levies and fines in its own currency. In our case, of course, it's the rand. Now, the third feature of monetary sovereignty, which is even more important, Comrade Duma, I'm interpreting this as I understand it, is a country that borrows in its own currency. In other words, with either no or very minimal debt that is in foreign currency. And also, of course, does not fix its currency. Although there may be interventions that you need sometimes, you know, on exchange controls. Now, South Africa comes close, Comrade Duma says, to meeting all these conditions. A lot of our debt is rand denominated, is not dollar denominated, which enables us to borrow in our own currency rather than borrow in foreign currency. If you go to the next slide, which is also Comrade Duma Kubule's slide, he gives important examples that most emerging market currency crises over the last 20 to 30 years have largely been related to foreign currency debt, or debt that is denominated mainly and often in US dollars. If you go back to the crisis of the peso in 1986, or the East Asian crisis in 1987 to 1998, the Russian meltdown in 1998, the Turkey meltdown in 2018, and Argentina in 2002 and 2018, all those countries had most, if not all, of their debt being foreign currency denominated. I hope comrades understand what is being said here, because it's very important. And Comrade Duma, in his typical way, makes a nice provocative statement there, that he proposes that we must restructure South Africa's public sector balance sheet. And this is none of the business of anyone in financial markets. This is the role of the state. And he makes the fourth point there, which is important. I'm just going through this quickly, that if there is capital flight as a result of some of the measures that we have or the global instability, we can then allow our currency to depreciate so that we are able to afford our own debt, or introduce capital controls to protect monetary sovereignty. Of course, he warns against this thing of, which our Reserve Bank, by the way, has a habit of doing, to increase interest rates to defend currency. We are very happy now as the party that the Reserve Bank, thanks to COVID-19, seems to realize that the crisis we are having, it needs that we must actually bring the interest rates way, way down. Comrade Duma is even arguing that actually we should go to 0% interest rates. Now, the other slide from Comrade Duma's presentation, I'm jumping because I've gone beyond time that Alex had given me, is on the PIC. Just to come back, just to remind the comrades, the Public Investment Corporation is the investment vehicle. That's slide 9 now. Yes, it's the investment vehicle that invests government employees' pension fund. Comrade Duma makes very important things there, that our pension scheme is fully funded, the PIC. In other words, it's operate as if everybody is going to retire at the same time tomorrow. We have 1.3 million public servants as if they are going to retire on the same day. He makes the point there on this fully funded that the PIC is 108% funded, which he correctly argues this is obscene level of funding in a country that has high poverty. By the way, the target that the PIC was set was that it must invest, it must fund itself to 90%. But it's funded itself up to 108%. We've been challenging the Progressive Trade Union here. Why are you quiet? With your money being invested in this way, there is excess funding even by its own target of 300 billion rands. We should be taking this 300 billion rands to somewhere else, as Comrade Duma, by the way, suggests. He's suggesting something we've always been arguing as the Communist Party, that we should have a pay-as-you-go pension scheme. What does that mean? It means those who are working now, when their monies are being deducted for pension, they are paying for those who are on retirement already. Because as he says, we'll always have teachers, nurses, and police. This thing of keeping enough money as if everybody is going to retire on the same day is wrong. Internationally, most government pension funds, it reminds us, are not funded at all or partially funded. They fund themselves in this way, that those who are working, they fund those who have retired. And the PIC was operating like this until the late 1980s. You see, Comrade Alex, when I talk about research, even in empowering our own comrades, a lot was done by the late apartheid state in the 80s, when it was realizing that we may be having a transition to democracy, to actually weaken our capacity to fund development for the majority of our people. This is just clarifying, by the way, on many of the things that the Communist Party statement was saying. Now, if we go to the last 3 slides that I want to point, Alex, that's slide 15, it's the last 2 actually. Slide 15 and 16 of Comrade Kubula's presentation, and 17, it's the last 3 slides, sorry. There's this slide where he talks about the Reserve Bank. And he makes very interesting points that generally we agree with. A sovereign state which issues its own currency cannot fail, which issues bonds and other things in its own currency, cannot fail to meet its obligations. That is very important, because you have got some control over your own currency. He argues, as I have said, the Reserve Bank should be cutting interest rates to 0. And also the Reserve Bank, there's nothing wrong. Many other central banks in the world, they do this in purchasing government debt. And also what he refers to as yield curve control. Japan, for instance, would determine interest rates across the yield curve in the economy. On the next slide, further on the Reserve Bank, what it can do, that it has R1 trillion foreign exchange reserves, and that from these it can release the Reserve Bank 500 billion rands, over and above what the president has already instructed to be released. We can reach R1 trillion and really begin to talk about a stimulus package rather than a package that is reactive to dealing with what we have. With this also we can recapitalize, because it's not just money that is being taken away for consumption, immediate consumption and so on. You can recapitalize your development finance institutions that can finance development, including SOEs, like the Industrial Development Corporation, the Land Bank, and the Small Enterprise Fund. You can also create what Comrade Duma calls developmental windows for banks to lend to priority sectors. South African banks are doing as they wish. They just invest, yet we have the power as government to say a percentage of your money must be invested in particular areas so that we are able to deal with unemployment. And he argues also that monetary finance can be such that we finance government spending at no cost, given the resources that we actually have. This next slide, he's making a very important point, which we agree with. And it's possible. With the illustration that we've made, reduce PIC funding to 50%, why not? As we say, you don't have to fund the PIC 108% because not all the civil servants are going to be retiring on the same day. Those who are working must fund those who have retired. And this actually can be used to write off state debt of R500 million, including the ESCOM debt, by the way. You could write it off. And you could use cash of 140 billion rands, he argues, to fund fiscal stimulus and convert assets into infrastructure. Let's not take the figures here as Comrade Duma has put them as the gospel truth. That's his argument, but it illustrates the scale at which we can be able, through monetary policy, to actually intervene. I'm sorry, Comrade Alex, I've gone now an hour of presentation. You had given me 45 minutes, but I don't know how I was going to be briefer than this. Now, comrades, I must conclude by saying these webinars are very good for discussion, but we must never forget about what is to be done. But also, this is an opportunity just to debate and engage on the issues. I had said to Comrade Alex, unfortunately, I'm only with you, well, that was the original arrangement, until 2 o'clock, and I have to leave exactly at 2:01, as I have got other commitments outside the house, which, by the way, I must say I enjoy now going out of the house, this lockdown. So if I've got an excuse and a license to go and do some higher education meetings outside the house, it's a bit of a relief. I'm not saying you must do that if you don't have a permit. You're gonna be in trouble. I do have a permit to go and do what I want to do. Thank you very much, comrades, for your patience. It's a long time since I was a lecturer, you know, so I don't know, Alex, how I did, how you would have rated me. 40% wouldn't be too bad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, GS. And we have the director of the Krizani Institute, Comrade Dr. Stembiso Bengu. And just before I can take questions, if there are any, let me check if Comrade Duma, Comrade Stembiso Bengu have enhancements to make. They are part of the SACP Political Economy Technical Task Team, where Comrade Duma made his presentation.
Or where I might have got it completely wrong from Comrade Duma's slides, he's free to correct me. Thanks.
Yes. Comrade Duma?
Comrade Alex, how are you?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Comrade Blade for quoting extensively from my presentation. Nothing was a mistake. I would give you 100%, Mr. Minister. I can't even, I was thinking where I can add. When you were talking about these developmental windows, which I'm a bank, they do whatever they want. I was remembering in the RDP, we actually specified we're going to monitor all the banks. What are they lending to? So it will be almost like prescribed assets for banks. 10% must go to SMEs. 5% must. It's in the RDP, but which page it was on. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add. But thank you very much for the invitation. Yeah.
Thank you, Comrade Duma, and great work, good research. Comrade Tembiso?
Thanks, Comrade Alex, and thanks in perpetual. I thought also it was a good presentation. I think for me, the only thing maybe I can say is the significance of this perspective. There's an op-ed that I think Comrade Alex is going to put tomorrow in the Umsebenzi that I penned, in which I am arguing that we are being subjected to a religion called neoliberalism, in which anything else that is an attempt to actually justify or be an alternative is almost treated as a religious heresy. And so I think the significance of opening spaces to have these kinds of discussions, and also this perspective around how actually economics is not just economics, but political economy, and how there are other alternative views to it is such important, because generally I think there's almost an established notion in South Africa that there's only one way. You know, anyone that tries to say anything that is in any way attempting to move away from what is the dominant a neoliberal view, it's almost like you are essentially breaking the canon of economics, and so I think I think it is important that we do this more, and probably some of the things that CHI is going to be doing as we're working with Comrade Alex to build some of these seminars on this.
Thank you very much, comrades. There are many questions, or in fact, there are many comments than questions, GS. And let me allow Comrade Glose, the YCL national spokesperson, to say a few words before we close, because what we have on the Facebook live streaming are comments, very good comments. So, Comrade Glose.
Thank you, Comrade Alex. On behalf of the National Secretary of the Young Communist League, on behalf of our national officials, on behalf of the entire National Committee and the membership of the Young Communist League, firstly, we would like to thank the GS for affording us the privilege to host him as the first communist in our country, obviously the General Secretary of the oldest communist party on the African continent, and the second oldest political organ or revolutionary organ on the continent. We would continue the discussion. We have noted everything that the General Secretary has said, and we note that the GS has also given us a clear instruction that we must now focus our energies on districts, as from today, most of the work that government would take, and obviously the entire movement would undertake, would be in districts. And as the YCL would like to make an emphasis that indeed we are going to activate our districts, and a lot of work will be going to our districts. But moreover, Comrade Diaz and Comrade Alex, we do welcome the fact that at least we are starting to get a clear ideological direction in terms of our economy. As the Young Communist League, we are faced with a huge challenge, by the way. The youth economic policy is coming to an end this year. And if I'm not mistaken, equally the new growth path. of which as young communists were expected to start also coiling a proper and clear view in terms of taking the youth struggle forward in this country. The COVID situation has worsened the situation for young people, youth unemployment, graduate unemployment, and so on. And as the Young Communist League, we've been having numerous lectures and seminars to try and articulate our position and the current abnormal, of which it has given us also an opportunity to try and speak about the kind of new normal we envision as the Young Communist League. But moreover, we want to thank the GS on behalf of the National Secretary. He's held up somewhere. He has given me clear instruction to thank the GS and tell the GS that we will continue the discussion in our strategy. Thanks, Comrade Alex.
Thank you, Comrade Loz. Comrade Andile Moshe, who welcomed the GS, had disconnected. He just connected now at the end. Comrade Andile, welcome back. And GS, you can just say a few closing words before we close the session.
Thanks very much, Comrade Alex, Comrade Jose, and the YCL leadership and all other participants who are here. I think maybe in conclusion, there's one important thing that I forgot, which I feel very strongly that the party and the YCL needs to take up. It happens to relate closely to the sphere in which I'm deployed. One of the big challenges we have in defeating COVID-19, as I said at the beginning, is to understand that it's not just a matter for biomedical science or biomedical sciences. It must be a multidisciplinary scientific effort. So one of the things that we need to be reflecting critically, for instance, on now is whether the advice and the direction we are getting as a country, does it reflect sources of scientific knowledge drawn from the multidisciplinary requirements? For instance, you do need biomedical scientists. They are absolutely essential. But in Marxist language, we would say they are they are necessary, but not a sufficient condition to deal with this. You need data scientists, for instance. You need statisticians. You need humanities and social sciences. What I've also, by the way, discovered, which I didn't know, is the role of the weather service in fighting COVID-19, in the sense that there is a relationship, for instance, between higher rates of infection from COVID-19 and high levels of pollution in particular geographical areas of our country. So the Weather Service studies pollution in different parts of our country. And that in itself, even by the way, space science is contributing to this. So the importance of multidisciplinary, so that we don't take decisions based on advice from a few scientific disciplines instead of a multiplicity. And also, just to conclude, Comrade Alex, I know that Comrade Duma has left. The challenge we have is the building of a broad progressive economic front, or a broad progressive front for revolutionary transformation of our economy. In other words, beyond just the working class. Yes, the working class must be central, but we need to be reaching out, to the lower middle classes, to intellectuals, to sectors of society, to build this broad. If we are to actually avoid what the party is saying, that we must not go back to the crisis before the crisis. Thank you very much for this opportunity, comrades. At least I got my first exercise today of being part of a lecture that is virtual. And I'm sure this is going to be our life from now onwards.
Thank you, GS. Comrade Mosha, as the National Secretary, may you kindly close for us, please? He is out. Thank you very much, members of the Young Communist League, followers of the Young Communist League on Facebook. and friends, as well as, ordinary members of society who are activists, who are interested in the future of our country and future generations. Let us continue to talk about this and engage in dialogue in search for solutions and the way forward. Thank you very much for your time. The session is now ending at 13:29. Much appreciated. Our sincere gratitude.
Thank you very much, comrades. Bye-bye, and keep on keeping safe.
Thank you.